Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. As-salatu was-salam ala Rasul al-Kareem. Amma ba'd. Wa a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri. Wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Rabbana zidna ilma. We will begin with the name of Allah. My speech today is about the life lessons that we learn from the story of Al Khidr and Musa A.S. The story of Musa A.S. and Al Khidr is mentioned in Surah Al Kahf, verses 60 to 82. It is the third story in the surah. And this story is also mentioned in Sahih al Bukhari, Book 6, Volume 60, and Hadith 249. How the story begins is that once when Prophet Musa a.s. was addressing Bani Israel, he was asked, "Who is the most learned man among the people?" He said, Musa a.s. said, "I am the most learned." Though Musa a.s. didn't utter these words out of arrogance or pride, he failed to attribute the absolute knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah corrected Musa a.s. and instructed him to go to the junction of the two seas, where he would meet one man who was more learned than Musa a.s. And that man is none other than Al Khidr. Al Khidr is not mentioned by name in the Quran, but we derive it from the authentic hadith, which is as follows. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu narrated that Musa alayhi salam asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, "Which of your slaves is more beloved to you?" Allah replied, "He who remembers me and does not forget me." And when Musa alayhi salam said, "My Lord, if there's anyone among your slaves is more knowledgeable than me, indicate him to me." Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replied, "Khidr is more knowledgeable than you." From this, the first lesson that we learn is one should not claim to know everything. Rather, he should say, Allahu alam. Allah knows best. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-alim al-ghayb. He is the knower of the unseen. Talking about this, I would also like to point out another very important aspect that we must consider and implement in our life. That is, we tend to discuss other people's affairs unnecessarily with limited or no knowledge of the details. Talking about others' life, others' matters, itself is very wrong. That's not our business. But you know what we do? We move one step further and start making judgments on their characters or behaviors. Don't you think this is extremely wrong? You know, why am I saying this? Because Musa a.s. was corrected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a very innocent statement that he claimed without arrogance or pride and absolutely no bad intention. If this is the case for a prophet who is guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then how careful should we be in our conduct on any matters? So the first lesson here is it's always better to say Allah knows best if you do not have proper knowledge about anything. Now moving on to the second lesson, the lesson that we learn here is recognizing the importance of seeking knowledge, perseverance, and humility. As soon as the command of Allah comes to Musa alayhi salam to go and find Al Khidr, he, Musa alayhi salam, instantaneously sets off his journey with his boy servant Yusha bin Nun to find Al Khidr. We come to know about this from Ayah 60 of Surah Al Kahf in the Quran. وَإِذْ قَالَ مُوسَى لِفَتَاهُ لَا أَبْرَحُ حَتَّى أَبْلُغَ مَجْمَعَ الْبَحْرَيْنِ أَوْ أَمْضِيَ حُقُبًا. Translation. And remember when Musa A.S. said to his boy servant, I will not give up traveling until I reach the junction of the two seas, or until I spend years and years in traveling. Subhanallah. When I ponder over this ayah, the first thought that comes to my mind is the discipline, obedience, love, and sincerity of Musa alayhi salam to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And secondly, his dedication, his hard work, and definitely his thirst for knowledge. And very clearly in Ayah 66, we get to know the humility of Musa alayhi salam. قال له موسى هل اتبعك على أن تعلمني مما علمت رشدا. Musa alayhi salam said to Al Khidr, may I follow you so that you teach me something of that knowledge, guidance and true path which you have been taught by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Musa alayhi salam was already a man of knowledge, a prophet himself, and a leader. But still, he didn't command Al Khidr to teach him or was not very rude to him. Rather, he was very humble and he asked Al Khidr to teach what he was taught by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even when Al Khidr said to Musa, you will not bear patience to follow me, Musa alayhi salam puts his complete trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and says, قال ستجدني إن شاء الله صابرا ولا أعصي لك أمرا. Ayah 69, Surah Al Kahf. This shows his yearning for knowledge. This shows his hunger to seek knowledge and his perseverance and humility. And moving on to the third lesson, which is etiquette of a teacher and a student. Al Khidr understood Musa alayhi salam did not have the patience. So even when conveying that to Musa alayhi salam, he said to him in a very polite way, قال إنك لم تستطيع معي صبرا. Ayah 67, translation. Verily, you will not be able to have patience with me. And yet, Al Khidr agreed to teach him and take him on his journey on condition that Musa alayhi salam does not question Al Khidr. Added to this, Al Khidr showed much patience at every incident. Even when Musa alayhi salam asked questions regarding his actions, he patiently reminded Musa alayhi salam that he should not question his actions and remain patient. This quality or this character is really very important for a teacher. Why? Because the qualities of a good teacher is firstly to be patient, kind, and firm at the same time. This makes him approachable to the students and makes his message reachable to them. And also, while they departed, Al Khidr did not leave him without explaining. Rather, he gave the definitions and the purpose of doing such and such things. On the other hand, when it comes to the etiquettes of a student, Musa alayhi salam, whenever he interrupted consciously or unconsciously or lost his patience, he wholeheartedly apologized to Al Khidr and requested him to give another chance to follow him. Musa alayhi salam, being a prophet and a leader, he could have reacted in a very different way. Rather, he was apologetic, which is the best quality for a student, and also his thirst and yearning for knowledge which took him far. And the fourth lesson that we learn is accepting the events happen with the will of Allah and believe in the unseen. And when they were traveling on the passenger ship, Al Khidr removed one plank from the ship, making there a hole, which would be repairable easily. This he did on purpose in order to save the ship for the poor sailor from the unjust ruler. Since Al Khidr had the knowledge of the unseen, by the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he did this. We come to know about this in Ayah 79 when Al Khidr says, for the ship it belonged to poor people working at sea, so I intended to cause defect in it, as there was after them a king who seized every good ship by force. Incidents like this happen in our life also. That sometimes when the unexpected happens, we will not be able to be in a mindset to accept it and to acknowledge it. That is the human nature. Being a true believer, it's a must for everyone to accept whatever is happening in your life, because everything happens with the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and everything happens for a reason. And there's definitely Allah's wisdom behind each event. Wallahu khairul makirin, and Allah is the best of planners. Allah knows what is best for us. So put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala completely and move on. Accept whatever happens in a positive way, saying Raditu billahi rabba, or Alhamdulillah, or Alhamdulillahi ala kulli hal, and move on. Lesson 5. Helping others without any expectations from people and expecting the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Surah Al-Kahf, Ayah 77, Quran states, so they set out until when they came to the people of a town, they asked its people for food, but they refused to offer them hospitality. And they found therein a wall about to collapse, so Al Khidr restored it. Musa A.S said, if you wished, you could have taken for it a payment. This Al Khidr did on purpose so as to help the orphan boys, because there was a treasure underneath the wall. And the orphan boys would be deprived of it when they grew up if the wall breaks. So Al Khidr mended the wall without any expectation. This is the lesson that we have to learn in our life, because helping others shouldn't be done with expectations. No, not at all. Rather, you should expect the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only, because it's Allah who's making you to help somebody. It's Allah who has chosen you to help somebody, and you're not doing it by yourself. Remember that, please. Always keep this in mind. If you help somebody, if Allah makes you to help somebody, which means you're fixing somebody's dunya, and that person is fixing your akhirah. If you keep this in mind, you will never ever expect anything from the person on the other side. Inshallah. Next lesson, that is the last lesson that we learn from the story, is reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for being righteous. Indeed, the promise of Allah is true. Surely Allah does not break promises. Inna Allah la yukhliful mi'ad. In Ayah 82, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the righteousness of the father. The good deeds of the father will have rewards on the children by the will of Allah. So always believe that the good deeds that you do today will benefit your progeny in the future. And these are the lessons that we learned from the story of Al Khidr and Musa A.S. But before concluding, I would like to talk about a few more points by quoting a few ayahs from the Quran, which we should always keep in mind and remember. Firstly, كل نفس ذائقة الموت. Surah Al Imran, ayah number 185. Every soul will taste death. Secondly, وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلٍ وَرِيدٍ, and we are closer to them than their jugular vein. Surah Al-Kahf, verse 16. And thirdly, وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. Surah Fatir, ayah 18, and Surah Al-An'am, ayah 164. And not bearer of burdens, burden of another. When we think about death, when we think that death approaches us no matter of what age we are and which place we are, the thought of Allah watching us 24/7, Allah much closer to us than our jugular vein, comes to our mind. And these two thoughts remind us of the day of judgment, the burden that we are going to carry on that day. It's only we going to carry our own burden. And all these thoughts all together makes us to be conscious of Allah every now and then. It builds up our taqwa and prevents us from committing sins. So let's make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us to the straight path, to acknowledge and implement the lessons that we learn from this surah, and to grant us Jannatul Firdaus. Ameen. Jazakumullah khairan kathira. Wa akhir da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم آمين يا رب العالمين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.